We'll wait about a minute or so and then we'll get started. It's going to be a very impatient minute, so we'll wait like 45 seconds or so.
Paola.
Hola.
Hey,
Hi. How are you?
good, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Okay, I think let's just get started. So welcome everyone to this wonderful event in partnership with the Jack D. Gordon Institute of Public Policy at Florida International University. I'm Graham Mattel, I'm the president of Global Americans. And for those who don't know, Global Americans is a think tank based here in DC, focused on Western Hemisphere foreign policy with a particular focus on democracy, development, and human rights. We have programs all throughout the hemisphere. You can find our work, our research, our reports at theglobalAmericans.org. Particularly relevant for this conversation is we have a very comprehensive program on Venezuela that we've titled The Way Forward for Venezuela. So I would encourage anyone who is interested to find us there on our website and begin engaging with our many events, our reports, and our articles. I want to start by thanking Julio, Borges, and Paola de Alemán for being with us today to unpack recent developments in Venezuela and collectively spend the next hour or so kind of making sense of kind of what the path forward looks like. I think the idea of this conversation is broadly to look at the general state of play in Venezuela, to look at the state of the opposition, the Mexico process, and the lead up to elections in 2024. So I want to start by briefly doing introductions, and then we'll dive into it. And I want to tell the folks who are with us virtually that if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And for those here with us in person, we're going to do a Q&A section at the end. So we'll make sure that you have the opportunity to ask questions then. So Julio Borges co-founded Primero Justicia and has been a leading figure within the Venezuelan opposition over many years, serving as deputy within the National Assembly over 3 periods and running for president within the opposition primaries of 2006. In 2019, Julio was appointed as representative of Venezuela to the Lima Group and eventually as presidential commissioner for foreign relations, effectively a foreign minister equivalent role within the Juan Guaido-led interim government. On December 5th, 2021, Julio resigned from his positions within the interim government, and today he remains a very active figure within Venezuela's opposition. Paola Bautista de Alemán is a political scientist, is the director of the magazine Democratización, and a columnist of Diálogo Político. She's the author of multiple books, including most recently the co-author with Julio Borges of the book La Patria que Viene. Paola is the National Vice President for Formation and Public Policy of the opposition party Primero Justicia and is a leading voice of the Venezuelan opposition. So I think I'll start with the broadest question of all for both you and Paola, Julio. And I'll start with you because you're here with me in person.
Okay.
In the latter part of your book, which you have right here with you, La Patria que Viene, you take a more critical tone with fellow actors within the Venezuelan opposition, namely the interim government. I'm going to pull out a direct quote here. You write, in 2022, after the opportunity of Juan Guaido and the interim government, having not achieved the objective of democratic change for Venezuela, we now enter a new unprecedented chapter for the fight for the freedom of the country. We must understand why, after building the international coalition of support for this country, the international dynamic on Venezuela has weakened. So I'll ask you both, Paola and Julio, in your view, what is your diagnosis of the state of play in Venezuela today? What does that kind of next new chapter for the fight for freedom look like? And what might we all expect over the next few months in Venezuela?
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Again, thank you all for having this conversation. You want me to start or Paola?
You first, yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, I think that for me, it's quite clear that we are closing a cycle, closing a chapter, and starting a new one, which is very short, I have to say, because the most important reference that we have in the future is the presidential election in less than 2 years from now on. And I really believe that we have so many things to rebuild and to reshape and to redefine that we are short of time. And we need to build many basics and important concepts. Basically, for example, the concept of unity. Unity is very damaged right now in Venezuela. It's a pity, it's something that it's a very bad news, but we have to be aware and we have to be very open that we have the challenge, and we have to show to international community, to yourselves, that you have been a real and close partners for democracy in Venezuela, that we know what we are going on, and that we are able to have a diagnosis, and we are able to overcome those problems and be credible again. So the problem of Venezuela seems to be that has lost the importance in the public conversation in the international realm. But the reason for that, it is not that the problem of Venezuela is less important than in the past. I think that on the contrary, what we are living in Venezuela each day is more and more dangerous for the region and for the United States and for democracy worldwide. But the real problem is that right now there is no plan for Venezuela. And when I say that there is no plan for Venezuela, this is something that I am telling for the responsibility of the Venezuelan people. It's not a Washington plan for Venezuela or an European plan for Venezuela. We are really in need to build the Venezuelan plan with Venezuelan people, with Venezuelan strategy, in order to gain confidence from Venezuelan people and in order to gain confidence for the international allies for the democracy and human rights in Venezuela. So after a very strong support for the international community, the Venezuela problem is still as a huge problem from many points of view that we can talk in this conversation. But right now, the real challenge is that we have to rebuild and we have to have in unity a new plan for Venezuela. And after that, try to gain again the confidence from the international community. And also, after Paola and our other question, we can talk about the details about what would be this plan that we have and we must to build right now in this new chapter.
And Paola, we'll turn to you with a similar question. What do you see as the current state of play in Venezuela? What do you see as you guys put in your book, this next chapter for the fight for freedom in Venezuela? And what might we expect over the next couple of months?
Well, first of all, I want to say hello to everyone who's there. Hi to Julio, to you guys. And regarding the intervention of Julio and this new chapter that he has identified, I can say that I can see three main aspects of our situation today. The first one is that recognize that we live under a consolidated dictatorship. And it's not like a regular dictatorship, it's a 21st century autocracy. And that means that we have a criminal dimension and new dimensions of autocracy that we have to deal with. In Venezuela, we live under fear and we live under terror. I live here in Caracas, so I can tell you what is being like being here and working and doing politics here. And we have a wild inequality, a lot of poverty. It's a country that it's really hard to understand if we look with regular glasses or perspectives. You have to look out of the box to see what is really happening in our country. Right now, it's hard to see who is really fighting for democracy and who is part of the regime in an undercover way. I must say that we live in shadowlands. The second idea is that we are fatigued. Since we have been struggling for more than 2 decades, you can say it fast but it's been 23 years of fight and the country is tired. We are all tired. We have voted, we have protested, we have done everything and we haven't succeeded yet. We have done everything. And we haven't, that means that we've lost democratic preconditions. Traditional political parties have been losing its representation capacity. We have a vigorous civil society, but is unarticulated. And as I said before, We are all tired, and it seems that the country has lost its hopes to achieve political change anytime soon. And the third idea is that even though all these things are happening, we need to restore our fighting spirit. Since it is a new kind of dictatorship, we have to find a way to restore democracy in a creative way. We need to learn about our mistakes, and I think that this meeting is going to be good to talk about it and reconnect with a country that, even though it's tired and morally ill, wants to live in democracy. And how can we do it? I think we have to work a lot in grassroots political work. We have to go to every county, to every block, to every state, to talk to the people and bring them hope. This is not an easy task, it's not an easy work, but that's the thing that we have to do. The center of the political work in Venezuela is inside the country, and I think that that's a lesson that we have learned in the past years.
Thank you so much, Paola. Paola, maybe I'll stay with you to mix up the order a little bit. I think one of the recent developments over the last couple of months was the decision at the end of December 2022 from the 2015 National Assembly to dissolve the interim government. At that time, Juan Guaido led a block of legislators seeking to maintain the interim government, and at one point even mentioned that legislators could replace him as interim president rather than eliminating the interim government as a whole. Can you, and I'll turn this question to Julio as well, but maybe we'll start with Paola. Can you explain to us from maybe both a forward-looking and a reflective perspective, the genesis of that specific decision, how you would now, looking back on the interim government, evaluate the life and lessons of the interim government, what changed and what it means for the opposition's ability to unify, not only in the lead up to 2024, but also the opposition primaries at the end of this year?
Yes, I think that there is a previous idea that it's really important, and it's in the book that Julio has on the table back there where you are. And it's that the interim government was the outcome of a really large strategy of the opposition, where the opposition leaders and all the members of that coalition worked together and built it with sacrifice and a lot of pain. It wasn't something that it was out of the blue. It was something that was built for years since well, Julio can tell the details, but I think that we can go back to 2015 maybe, or previously 2014. And sadly, we couldn't move to democracy. And I think that one of the lessons of that experience is that no one can make decisions by themselves. And when you work unilaterally, that is not good for democracy, and it's really good for the dictatorship. And I think that that's the main and the very important lesson from the interim government, and it was a huge mistake of some political forces. And regarding the primaries of 2023 and the general elections of 2004, I may say that we have an opportunity. Even though Nicolás Maduro looks strong, they are not strong. What appears to be is not. We have hyperinflation, we have social mobilizations around the country, we have discontent. And to take advantage of that opportunity, we have to work together, we have to win back the international support, and we have to reconquer the people's spirit. And there is another thing about the interim government, is that it is not a political reality in our country. When you go to talk to the people in the grassroots, when you go to, I don't know, civic assemblies or meetings, or when you walk around, you can notice that nobody talks about the interim government, and it's something that people want to move on. And that's why I think that the decision to transform the interim government to the reality that you have right now, it was a really brave decision. And I think that Julio can talk about it with more details.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. Julio, can you talk about it with more details? But maybe I'll add, Julio, you were very involved in the interim government at a certain point before you resigned. Maybe can you speak a little bit to the question that I raised to Paola, but maybe also some of the circumstances that led you to conclude maybe that the interim government wasn't tenable going forward?
Sure. Well, I totally agree with Paola in the way that the framework is as follows. When we work together and when we work under unity, we accomplish very good things. For example, when we win the parliamentarian election in 2015, it was something really without comparison in these years of fight. And we build a perfect unity. And after that, we work together in order to make possible to show to the world that Maduro has no legitimacy. When I denied to sign out the agreement in Dominican Republic, that changed everything. That changed everything because after that, Maduro keep an election and the world said this election is not recognized by the free world. And this opened the possibility to have the recognition from the parliament a year after that with Juan Guaidó. As Paola said, what we achieved was not built overnight. It was a process that we build strength and strength and strength. And it's a process that we have to rebuild right now. It's like when you are trying to blow up a balloon, you have to put all your effort, all your lungs and your air, trying to increase the pressure inside. And then the international support arrives once you have made all this pressure in a reality. And what we have to be aware is that we have to rebuild, Venezuelan people has to rebuild our organization, our strengths, our proposals to the country in order to gain the confidence for the people. So in my view, what we gave to Guaidó was a treasure that we built together. And unfortunately, the bureaucratic dynamic made to lose the focus. And the focus should have been to create a real movement of popular resistance against a tyranny, and not a formal government that spend a lot of time with the assets and with the own bureaucracy and handling money. That was a mistake because we lose our real focus, which was to increase and to make more powerful this popular movement of action and activity against a dictatorship. And something else, I think that this is a very important lesson. From the very first day, our flag, our will had to be free elections once and again, and repeat free elections. The mantra about cese de la usurpación that Guaidó adopted is something that we had no control on that, because we don't have the tools or the force or the alliance with army force, for example, in order to achieve or to put the end of Maduro's government. Our strength is call for free elections from the very first day, and I think that that way would have been much backed up by the international community if our sole and unique flag and position would have been free election from the very beginning. Another point is that we weren't able to transform ourselves, to reinvent ourselves. We passed 4 long years under the same scheme, and the world changed around us. Latin America changed completely. Change in Brazil, change in Colombia, change in Argentina, change in Chile, change in Mexico, in Central America, and we keep the same scheme without being able to reinvent ourselves in order to reshape a new relationship and a new dynamic. And since we had that time, 4 years, the world started thinking where this going, where this process is going. So I feel that what we are doing right now is trying to be very honest and very sincere to accept that things have changed surround Venezuela, even in the States, and that we have to be prepared to assume ourselves our responsibility and the duty of building and developing a plan that has to be done and lead by Venezuelan people in order to gain the support from the international community.
Thank you, Julio. So maybe I think we've spent some time now looking backwards. So now let's look a little bit forward. In regards to that specific plan, can you tell us a little bit where things stand in terms of the opposition primary of 2023? I think there was initially, many months ago, the date was floated of June 2023 as the opposition primary. More recently, they've moved it back to October 2023. Can you tell us kind of what work has been done in the lead up to the opposition primary? What work remains to be done in terms of building unity and getting all actors on board? And then what the risk might be if there are potential holdouts with the opposition primary?
Well, that's quite important, Guy. I believe that, as I mentioned, that we have 20 months to build out of nothing a strong movement. Is it possible? I think it's possible, but it requires a lot of maturity and a lot of consciousness, a lot of generosity from the democratic alternative in Venezuela. I think that primaries are very important, are crucial, but it's not enough. This is very important. Primaries are really a crucial condition for rebuilding a democratic alternative in Venezuela, but it's not enough. We are right now in a huge divorce from the people in Venezuela. As Paola said, the problem is that people feel in Venezuela that politics is not useful for a change, which is a tragedy. But people feel that the dictatorship in Venezuela has any kind of trick or new law or any kind of whatever magic they can do or trump in order to avoid an election next year. So we have to do a lot of things. First of all, we have to rebuild unity in a credible way. It's not just a picture. It has to be something very organic. We have to build not only unity regarding a process of primary in 8 months, which is a short term, but we should be able to build also a program that we share in the essentials: human rights, democracy, economy, oil, and the core things about Venezuela. Something that the people start dreaming that we may have a different country in the future. One of the problems is the people is like resignated, thinking there is no change. We have to resignate to live with Maduro's scheme, and there is no possibility for a different country. This is another issue. Something in addition that I think is crucial, we have to rebuild a new narrative to the army force. The army force is essential in Venezuela. The top of the army force, as you know, is full of corruption. It's part of the system, it's part of the problem. But you have a huge part of the army force that is composed by young officials, and you have to be able to tell them that they will be part of democracy, they will be part of the future, they will be part of a different country in the future. Right now, they feel completely separate from the real political dynamics in Venezuela. So I think this is quite important. Another thing that we have to take into account is how to build an internal force that makes possible to go to the different allies, US, European Union, very important, Latin American countries, in order to call them to help us to build electoral conditions for a competitive election in Venezuela. This is quite difficult because you have to align the different incentive from Europe with the left wings countries in Latin America, with the US in this moment, to try to build a scheme of a win-win situation in which everybody could push for electoral conditions in Venezuela and convince them that a political change, even and mainly to Lula or Petro or AMLO or Fernandez in Argentina, is a real need for the health of the region. Because, as you know, many Latin American countries are suffering for the migration from Venezuela, and it's a real problem. And I think that although they try to build like a good team or a new left in Latin America, Maduro is a headache for them. And also with Europe and the US. So it's a very huge task to align these different incentives for these different keyboards in order to make possible and credible that we are building a real option of power and connection and organization with the people in Venezuela. Everything I told you is huge. Yeah. It's difficult, but I really believe that we have an opportunity if we are able to rebuild our force and convince our allies that we can push in order to have this competitive election next year.
Thank you, Julio. It sounds like you have a lot on your plate over the next couple of months. Paola, I'll turn it over to you. I think so much of the conversation about the opposition these days tends to eventually fall back on this question of the opposition being fractured or divided. And I think as Julio just eloquently laid out, there's much more to that, right? There is both a grassroots element, which is kind of making sure that the opposition is addressing some of the disillusionment within Venezuelan politics more broadly and within the Venezuelan citizenry and getting them kind of galvanized and engaged in the political process. And then at maybe at the higher political level, there's establishing points of consensus and unity and also investment in democratic processes. So I know, Paola, that you are kind of on the streets in Venezuela all the time in the grassroots, but also engaging in the high political level. What can you say about the state of the opposition, how fractured it is, and then also some of the points that Julio was just mentioning in terms of the interest, the appetite, and the engagement of the Venezuelan people in this process?
Well, I might say that it's evident that we are not having like the best moment in the opposition in Venezuela right now. And that after the interim government, if you check and you do a balance about how the process was, today we are in a weak situation as opposition. But there are some signs of reality that can tell us that can be changed. And I think that there is a situation with the primary elections that is a really good sign. The last week was the rally where the primary commission announced the date of the primary elections, and I went there, and I must say that it was a really, really good rally. The main speaker was Jesus Maria Casal, who is the president of the Electoral Commission, and he is a really respected person in the country. I personally admire him in the academic and in the political field. And that's very important because on that meeting, they were members of all political organizations, not only the political parties that are part of the unitary platform, but they were members of Vente Venezuela, which is the movement of María Corina Machado, and they were also Fuerza Vecinal members, and they were also members of Voluntad Popular. Juan Guaidó actually went to the event, so I think that that's a really good sign for the future. And besides that, all the other things that I think it's very important is what Julio said about building a strong movement in the country. And that's very, very, very important. And I think that there are three ideas that could help us to build that movement. First, organization, that is very important. Then unity, that is important not only in the grassroots, but in the higher levels, as you said. And the third one is civic virtue. First, the organization is that political parties are irreplaceable on liberation and democratic inauguration process. And what's a strong political party? What you need to have organizations that has powerful ideas and faithful followers. Don Patricio Aylwin, who was the first president of Chile after Pinochet, always said of political parties about strong body and a strong soul. Body are the followers and soul are the ideas that move the political parties. Then unity, and that unity has to be huge, not only political parties. You need NGOs, you need all the unions, all the organizations that you have in the country. And that's really hard because you need like clear rules to interact between them and a lot of patience. When you have a lot of people, you need a lot of patience to do agreements. And the last one is civic virtue. And this may sound naive after 23 years of political struggle, but we need to be better persons. And that's something that we need to think about it. We need to be brave, we need to be generous, we need to be clever, we need to learn how to suffer, and we need to learn how to forgive, not only with the dictatorship, but between us, between the opposition. We need to learn how to forgive. And this is really hard, but it's necessary. And when you live in fear, it's easy to become selfish or hopeless or even cynic. But as Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, the true fight for freedom is fought in our hearts, in the heart of every Venezuelan. So I think that there is no other way to be better persons, to be better politicians.
Well said. Maybe I'll stay with you, Paola, if I can. You spoke a little bit about the role of NGOs. And last month, certain actors within Chavismo rolled out a new NGO law that, according to the UN, could represent a point of no return in the closure of the civic and democratic space in Venezuela. Can you tell us a little bit more about this proposed new law, what it would do, and what it would mean for NGOs that are struggling to create more civic space for this sort of political experience that you're talking about?
Yes, the first thing is that this is not a new initiative. Every year they start with a new law that wants to go against the people who wants to fight for democracy and freedom. Right now, the difference is that the political parties are on a really bad shape, as we said in our previous conversation, and that the NGOs has like a really important role in the democratic struggle. So I think that is something that we have to be worried about, but that cannot stop us in the work that we are doing. And we have to mention the political prisoners, that on the political prisoners, we have people who are members of NGOs that work for human rights. And I think that that's a field where the international community is really important, because when you have an international community that is not leave behind the people who are in jail or who are in risk or who are having really rough times in working for human rights, on that, when that happens, we can keep working even though we have this kind of loss and injustice.
Great. Thank you, Paola. And Julio, speaking of the international community, you mentioned it a little bit in your remarks, but the role of Latin American leadership on the Venezuelan crisis. I think there was hope in some circles with the election of Gustavo Petro in Colombia, with Lula in Brazil, that there would be some Latin American leaders that could not only speak to Maduro, but can serve as a sort of bridge between the opposition and Chavismo. What do you make of the role so far that President Petro and Lula, though still early days, have played? And what sort of optimism do you have about the role of Latin American leadership with respect to the Venezuelan crisis?
Well, I wouldn't use the word optimism, but not because I think that it's a real riddle what would be the behavior of this leader. This is critical. This question is real vital. Why? Because there is a kind of double game. To simplify, Maduro wants to be part of the new Cuba. He wants to be the new Cuba, the new Fidel, and I really believe that the Cuban people, they say to Maduro the whole day, you are the biggest leader of the region, you are bigger than Fidel, bigger than Chavez, and Maduro believes that he has accomplished that. But as Paola said, the good news is that Maduro is not a leader. He's a survival, which is different, but he's not a leader. People don't believe in Maduro himself, or Maduro hasn't any particular set of ideas, nothing, or mystic, nothing at all. So this double game is quite important because you see that unfortunately Latin America left-wing countries have not been really clear, making a clear cut between a left-wing democracy and a totalitarian left-wing process like Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua. And this is something that we try to understand, but it has no explanation. I see an exception in President of Chile, Boric. He has done great, and I really admire his position. And he said left-wing parties or government reject human rights violation. He has been very vocal about Venezuela in the last UN Assembly last year. He repeated not too long as well. And in the case of Petro, he has been very vocal about Venezuela returning to the inter-American system of human rights, which is good. And Lula said that he has advised Maduro not to have a re-election in Venezuela, but to promote an alternative kind of system. And AMLO, which is a very weird guy, I don't know how to say about AMLO, but he's an old-fashioned left-wing guy, and I don't know what he thinks in reality. But going to your question, which is true, in my opinion, although they try to show that there is a new wave for left-wing countries and left-wing governments in Latin America, for me, it's quite clear that Maduro is a headache for most of them, not only for political reasons, but also for social reasons, like the problem of migration. It's important to underline that Venezuela should not be part of the landscape. As we speak right now, today, at least 1,000 people left the country to go to Colombia or to Peru or to Panama. The problem is still going and going and going, and people is suffering for all this system that Maduro has created. The salary, that is one of the topics of Professor Guerra right here, he won't be able to fix the fact that a teacher is earning $10 per month. It's impossible that he can change that reality. So in my view, we have an opportunity, answering your question after this framework, we have an opportunity in Mexico that these different countries really push for concrete measures regarding human rights and the electoral process. And this is a very crucial test for them. And they have to be black and white with Maduro in order to see a real commitment in the near future about concrete measures regarding human rights and electoral rights. And I hope that if Maduro tries to escape for this commitment, these different leaders will say something clear about Maduro trying to escape from democracy in this very moment. So I hope, and I really believe, that the conditions are set in order to push Maduro in Mexico to build this kind of agreement. And I really believe if they are coherent, they should very vocal about pushing Maduro to that square.
I have a couple points that I want to return to on that answer, but I'm going to turn it to Paola with the exact same question, and then I'll come back to you. Paola, how do you see the Latin American leadership in terms of the Venezuelan crisis on multiple fronts? No, not just immigration, but democratization, on pushing forward on negotiations. How would you evaluate the role of Latin American leadership in all of this?
Well, I must say that the problem in our country is not about ideologies. It's not about if you are left wing or right wing. It's about if you believe and you enforce democracy or you don't. And I think that the presidents of Latin America that can engage with that reality would be helpful for us. And I agree with Julio that the performance and the actions that President Borges in Chile has taken has been really good for us, has been really brave, and it's maybe a reference for these presidents who are from the left wing of Latin America to deal with Venezuelan problem. And I think that it's really important to acknowledge that the Venezuelan problem is not only in our country, because you have problems that goes to the other countries, like migrations, like poverty, like security problems that are really important, drug stealing, and all this kind of criminal stuff that these countries has to take care of. So I think that if these presidents that they say that they are left wing and that their main issues for them are the social issues for their countries, they can apply those reference to Venezuela and maybe have different actions for our country.
Thank you, Paola. I told you I wanted to return to a couple points, so I'm going to do one of those points for you.
I would like something.
Yeah, please.
No, about what Paola said. You have this acid test with Mexico, as I mentioned. But for example, the answer of these different leaders in the case of Nicaragua has been very poor. And this is something that it shouldn't be the same reaction or measure regarding Maduro. But in Nicaragua, I really feel they had an opportunity to be stronger promoting democracy and human rights in the case of Ortega, and it hasn't been the case. So this is an alarm that we have to be clear about it, and probably the whole world is in silence before what's going on in Nicaragua, which is a real pity.
I wanted to ask you, I would be remiss if I didn't, if you could give us a bit of an update on where things stand on the Mexico process. Because I think from here in DC, we haven't seen many updates over the past couple of months. I think there was a lot of hope that some recent moves would bring both sides back to the table.
Well, there has been a timetable. The timetable was that the first step was based on a humanitarian agreement that was signed on November last year. And this humanitarian agreement has to be designed and developed and in the need to find the money to put on this particular agreement. It's just for social expenditures, and the United Nations is involved in the way the process and the programs will be developed. But right now we are in the middle of the bureaucracy that has stopped the configuration of the new scheme. It is not clear what would be the final development of this humanitarian agreement. This has been used by the dictatorship in order to say, we're gonna wait until we have everything done and until we have the humanitarian agreement starting their programs in order to pass to the second step, which is the political debate. The political debate, according to the original timetable, it had to start it on December. And the regime said, the dictator said, no, we won't talk on the political agenda right now. We want to wait until January next year. On January, there has been any advance on that. They said after that, February, we are almost ending February. And it seems that they right now, they are starting to say that they want to initiate the political agenda in an informal way. But for me, it's quite clear. I have been involved in different processes that they trying to gain time to show to the world that they are in a process of negotiation. But right now, that is the moment of truth in which they have to show a real will for a concrete commitments for the election and for human rights. They're trying to gain time. In that particular area, Guy, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, we have to try to align the different incentives from the Latin American countries, Europe and the US, in order to push Maduro for really taking seriously the negotiation and not allow Maduro to gain time, because that would be a tragedy for the possibility to have a semi-competitive election next year. So we are in a real critical months in this near future.
And Paola, I'm going to turn it to you, and I do want to reserve time at the end for folks here and folks tuning in virtually to ask questions as well. But Julio, you spoke a little bit about the teachers, and Paola, you spoke previously about the grassroots in Venezuela. Last month, Venezuela's public sector workers mounted what was one of the biggest protests in years in Venezuela, as they fall behind in an economy that increasingly embraces the US dollar. There were hundreds of protests all across the country, led by public school teachers, led by nurses and others, demanding higher salaries as they keep up with a rapid depreciation of the local Venezuelan currency. Can you speak to those protests, but also more broadly to the unequal recovery, if we can call it a recovery, in Venezuela in recent months, and unequal both across professional sectors, but also outside of Caracas, which is to say across geographic lines as well?
Well, this is a really important topic because the dictatorship has been doing strong efforts to communicate a lie. And this lie is that Venezuela is getting better, and Venezuela is not getting better. It's wild inequality. There is a lot of poverty. And when you look outside, I don't know, 12 counties that are like the richest counties of the municipalities, no? Right? In the country, all that you can see is poverty. All that you see is people who is having a lot of troubles to buy food, who doesn't have water, regular water or electricity. And I must say that the liberalization process in the economy is not something that is formal, or is something that is on the law. Like, I mean, like regular reforms or formal reforms that comes like a, I don't know, like a perestroika in our country. It's not that way. It's something that it depends only on the will of the few who are in power. And that's really unstable, because maybe they want, and the will on this moment, they want to open the economy, but tomorrow maybe they don't want to do it anymore. And that instability creates a really hostile environment who is really hard to understand. It's shadowlands, because you go to some municipalities in our country, Las Mercedes, which is a district where you have restaurants or hotels and all that, and you can say that maybe you are in New York or Paris or DC or, I don't know, Miami, but when you go like few kilometers around, you have a really, really bad situation. So I think that when you have to, or if you want to analyze the Venezuelan economy, you have to take this on the analysis. You have to take that this is not; those are not reforms, regular reforms that are supported by laws, that they are only supported by the will of a few, and that we don't know when it's going to end. This kind of liberalization.
Thank you, Paula. And I think maybe I'll after this, I'll relinquish my my moderator's privilege here. But can you both maybe in closing my round of questions before we turn it over to everybody else? We have an international audience with us. You're here, Julio in DC, and Paola, you're tuning in, but we do have an international audience with us virtually. What is your message broadly to the US and to the international community about how best to support the Venezuelan people?
Well, I want to be very, very honest and very sincere. My main concern is that Venezuela becomes part of the landscape and the people get accustomed about what's going on in Venezuela. If you read, for example, the fact-finding missions report, the testimonies that they have, the proof they have about the massive violation of human rights is astonishing. It's outrageous. And Maduro tries to hide this real Venezuela. That's the real Venezuela, trying to show, as Paola said, a part of the city in which you have the most expensive cars and restaurants and hotels and every kind of diversion. But this is a little and a small and tiny piece of a population, less than 0.01%. And we should be able to maintain the flesh and blood reality about what's going in Venezuela. As I mentioned earlier, people is leaving Venezuela each day. We reached 7 million people that left Venezuela. This is not 7,000 or 7 people, 7 million people, which is huge. And people that is leaving Venezuela against their will because there is no future. The contrast between Caracas and the rest of Venezuela is huge. People is starving. There is no opportunities for having a job. And Maduro never will be able to transform the economy or the institutions in order to try to bring stability. So my concern is that the pragmatic view try to accommodate regarding Venezuela, and we lose the real focus is that you have millions of people suffering, and not only because of people is suffering, but also something which is very important, that is the geopolitical importance of Venezuela. Venezuela right now is an occupied country with different interests like Russian, Cubans, Iranians, and Chinese people at the heart of America, trying to build a new connection with the rest of the world. And in my view, I don't know your opinion on this, but it's real amazing. If you compare the situation right now, it's much more worse than in the Cold War. Because in the Cold War, it was mainly political propaganda with different important episodes. But the level of involvement of Russia in Nicaragua or in Venezuela, or the Iranians in Venezuela, the involvement of the organized crimes, the dimension of investment that China is making in the region is a different balance of power. And for the international community, what is going on in Venezuela is really, really important in order to keep the values that we share regarding human rights, democracy, and free trade and progress. So don't let Venezuela be part of the landscape and get accustomed that there is nothing to do with Venezuela. On the contrary, this is the demonstration that we are in a new chapter, and we have to fight with all our strengths in order to change everything. And we are very, very thankful for you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you for being here. Let's turn it to Paola, and then again, we're going to open it up to the floor as well. Paola, same question.
Okay. Well, I think that there are three ideas that are really important in the Venezuelan situation. First, for the international community to acknowledge that this is a dictatorship, that this is not like a democracy that is sick or that is like a hybrid system. No, this is an autocracy, and this is a new kind of autocracy. And I think that the free world has to reflect and to think how to deal with this reality that is really close to the United States. We are only 3-hour flights from Miami, so we're really close. And we are a place that is being a base for other autocracies like Iran, like Russia, like Cuba, like Nicaragua, like China. So I think it's very important to to think about this idea that in Venezuela we have a dictatorship. The other thing is that human rights are important, and this is maybe this is obvious for everyone, but sometimes it's not that obvious. Is that we have in Venezuela we have massive violations of human rights, and that's something that has to be. We need to talk about it, because here in the country we have a lot of censorship. We're inside. I wouldn't be able to talk like this in mass media here in my country. When I talk about human rights violations, everyone gets scary because there are going to be consequences. So we need to talk about the violations of human rights in Venezuela outside the country, so that news can come inside the country for other ways. And the other thing that is very important is that Venezuelan people, even though we are having like a really bad mood on fighting for democracy, we want a political change. We want to open this path to democracy, and we are willing to work together. And that's really important. And I think that all these three things, that we are a dictatorship, that human rights matters, and the Venezuelan people wants to fight for democracy, is that the free world or the countries that live under democracies, we need to I think to study the case of Venezuela, maybe to analyze the international cooperation system to promote democracy in the world. Something is not working on that cooperation system, because autocracies are really, really efficient to cooperate with each other. All the solidarity between dictatorships is really, really good. They transfers knowledge, they transfers money, they know how to work together, they don't have limits. So I think in this century, we need to, okay, that was the 20th century, but we are in 21st century, and this is the kind of autocracies that we have, and we need to find paths of cooperation that really work and improve the efforts in the countries.
Thank you, Paola. I have a related question from the audience that's tuning in virtually, but I just want to make a note here to folks with us in person. If you do have a question, raise your hand and we'll kind of add you to the queue. So this is a question from Jaya. She says, Julio and Paola, thanks for speaking with everyone today. I'd like to hear what actions the US can take to truly support the negotiations, especially considering the reorganization of the opposition and the humanitarian situation. I know the humanitarian fund has been discussed as an important step forward. So what more should the US and other countries do in terms of generating progress?
Okay. Well, I would like to make a comment on the whole region and the US. Latin America, as you know better than me, it's undergoing a very hard time. If we go country by country, the problems are huge. For example, Haiti. Haiti has become a failed state, taken by organized crime and mafias. The problem, in my view, we have three different problems that acting in the whole region. One of them, as Paola mentioned, is democracy. We have a crisis of democracy, not only in Latin America, but in the whole world. And the free world hasn't been able to renew the scheme of democracy for this century. But in Latin America, it's a real trouble. And we know the cases, and we have talked about that. The other problem is migration. Migration has become a problem that seems that it won't have stability, or it will stop. On the contrary, it will increase. I was looking some figures about Colombia. I mentioned to Guy and before the conversation, and it started again moving people out of Colombia to migrate to Panama or to United States. And this is a problem that is growing and growing and growing. And it has to do with the dismantling of democracy and human rights migration. And the third point, that has been a takeover in the whole region, is organized crime. Many countries in the region are possessed by narco traffics or organized crime. And the accumulation of these three issues, organized crime, democracy and human rights, and migration, are creating a new paradigm in Latin America that I don't feel that there is a comprehension about the deep trouble that the region is living because of these three different elements. So regarding the US, I think that there is a concern about the region, but right now there is no strategic plan in order to overcome these three main elements: migration, the destruction of democracy and human rights, and organized crime. And in my view, this is the most important challenge for the region right now. And Venezuela is a huge actor in developing these three troubles together. And going concrete to the answer, what we need is how to increase the possibility and the pressure on electoral and human rights conditions for the next election. And it has to be an unanimous position from Europe, Latin America, and the US, and put Maduro and his system against the wall, that we need real and optimal and decent electoral standards in order to have a political change in Venezuela. This is something that the US, to be more concrete, the US is in a position in which we should be creating like a international front for free elections in Venezuela. You know, like a group of countries worldwide that can be part of this kind of front in order to push in different parts of the world for free elections in Venezuela. I think we have the conditions to develop this idea, and this is something that global can contribute a lot.
Thank you, Julio. I'm going to turn it to you, Paola. We have another question from the audience coming from D. Smith, who says, I would like to understand how the Venezuelan economy is working now. How much of the country's revenue is on the illicit side, and how would this transition with the political transition? Also, what is the disposition of different socioeconomic groups toward the current government and toward supporting or forcing change in Venezuela?
Well, I would like to understand it too. That means that I don't have an answer for that. Maybe Professor Guerra, who's there, can have a better answer for that than me. But what I can say is that it's something that is connected with what Julio said about the way that this kind of autocracies work, and is about the organized crime. We have here in Venezuela, we have things that they don't have like an easy explanation. We have like a Ferrari rental cars here. We have like huge restaurants that are more expensive than any restaurants in other city of the world. We have things. We have even a restaurant that goes in the skies and flies. You can check it on the internet. And it's hard to understand how does it works. But what can I say is what I said before, is that this is not like a product of regular reforms or formal reforms, economic reforms, as Gorbachev did in the USSR. Is something that comes from the will of some bureaucracy member or some people who is part of the government, of the government, and they say, oh, well, maybe if we do this, we're going to have more money to do this kind of stuff. But it's not easy to know how does it work, and that that it's really important to study that and to know how does it work, and to connect with the answer that Julio said before. I think that is very important for the democratic world, specifically to the US, to find ways to understand better how the autocracy works. This is very important. They need to have people on the field and don't depend only on second sources who are outside the country. It's very important to be here and to realize what is happening and how it's happening, because it's something that is not completely new. You maybe can have some kind of this in some places like Mexico, or maybe, I don't know, El Salvador. You have like maybe some countries where this kind of stuff happens, but it's obvious that you need to have people here that can come and in a opacity ground, because we don't have statistics, we don't have numbers, and that difficult very much to understand how the economy works, can describe how it works and how it's happening.
Thank you, Paola. I'll float this one to either of you. It's from Marco Negroni, and he says, in October 2023, New York law will force bondholders to file claims to protect their rights and comply with their fiduciary duties. Billions of US dollars of claims and accelerations could be avoided through a tolling agreement. Does the opposition have a viewpoint on such an agreement? A very technical question. I don't know if Paola or Julio, you want to?
I think Julio has answered.
You mentioned about the humanitarian agreement or what?
So it's about the New York law statute of limitations and bondholders' claims. And so there's a tolling agreement that would prevent the acceleration of such claims. And the question is, does the opposition have a viewpoint on such an agreement?
No, I have no opinion on that either. Actually, I don't have information for have a sensitive opinion on that.
Okay. Paola, tampoco.
Neither.
Mr. Guerra?
We have another question, then we'll circle back with Marco at a later date. Ted Pincus asks, are sanctions damaging the economy and affecting ordinary Venezuelans? Which sanctions should be changed or removed?
Well, listen, this is a difficult topic, and you have to be aware that the purpose of the sanction is not to punish the country. The purpose of the sanction is to make pressure on the system, and in the case of the personal sanctions, is try to modify the behavior of the people. I have a question that I do to myself time after time. After this huge pressure, Maduro doesn't want to change. And the small opportunities for change that we have, Mexico, for example, and very small details, is due to this huge pressure that has been put on Maduro. I really think that we should meditate about, if we have no pressure on Maduro, he will be doing, as he's trying to do, whatever he wants. So I think that we are right now in a real moment in order to open an offer to the dictatorship and said, listen, we are willing to remove this sanction, but you have to be willing to open human rights and democracy in Venezuela. And this is something that I want to be very clear. And we have experts here that know the topic very well. And I want to be very honest with this. Most of the problems regarding health system, electricity, migration, people eating from the garbage in the street were before the sanctions. It was not the case that Venezuela was a paradise and then the sanctions destroyed Venezuela. I am aware that sanctions have to be able to have a limit in order to produce a change. And right now, Mexico is an opportunity to really, if Maduro really have a will, and if Maduro care about the people, to say, listen, let's modify the system, and I am open for what most Venezuelan wants, that is to have democracy in Venezuela. We will see. In my view, Maduro, he doesn't care about the well-being of Venezuela. And another issue, Maduro always uses the sanctions as an excuse. But as Paola said, all the people surrounding Maduro is living in a absurd, outrageous impunity before the Venezuelan people. You see in Venezuela cars that you don't see in Dubai or whatever, you know? So these people live in their own world without taking care about the real Venezuelan people, and spend $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 in a restaurant, and a teacher earns $10 by month. So I don't think that Maduro have particular interest in the people. On the contrary, they have corrupted the country. And to answer the question, I really feel that we are right now in the very moment in order to make a proof if Maduro wants to change the system of sanctions, okay, but there must be a quid pro quo. Open the system in human rights, open the electoral conditions, and the pressure can be modified in order to have a change in Venezuela.
Thank you, Julio. Paola, I'll turn it to you to answer that question as well. And then I think we'll do one more question before we close.
Yes, I think that the main question is about the reform capacity of the dictatorship. How far are they willing to go if the sanctions are lifted? I think that that's the main question about sanctions. And also that sanctions cannot be like the only tool to make pressure. You need another measures to be coordinated with sanctions. And even and as Julio said, we were in a really bad position in social and economic issues before sanctions, and that's very important to have in mind, because otherwise it's easy to be part of that rhetoric idea about the sanctions and poverty in Venezuela. But I think that the main question is that how far is the reform capacity of the dictatorship, and if they really want to move forward democracy. We have examples in recent history, like Zimbabwe or Sudan. We have experiences on that, and I think that the question also is, how can we make more pressure in the international field and in the national field?
Thank you, Paola. So the last question will go to Global Americans Advisory Council member Francisco Minaldi. Francisco asks, what role can and should the Venezuelan diaspora play in restoring democracy in Venezuela? What is the best way to organize and mobilize the community abroad? And how can the opposition avoid the divide between those inside the country and those abroad?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know if Paola or myself.
No.
For both, let's say.
No, well, first of all, thank you, Francisco, from doing the meeting. And Francisco is one of the most brilliant minds in economy and oil industry. And this is a key issue because one of the risks that we have is making this awful division between Venezuelans outside Venezuela and Venezuelans inside Venezuela. And one of the things great about this event is that we are speaking with Paola that is in Venezuela and we are here in DC, and we have to be able to work together. We have a real challenge regarding the primaries. One of the most hot issues is how to build the possibility that these 7 million people, not all of them, but half of them, probably they are potential voters because of the age, and they could participate. One of the most important issues in Mexico is to allow Venezuelans abroad Venezuela to vote and have the whole system able to vote, because it will be on the responsibility of Maduro to develop the capacity for voting people abroad. But in different events in recent years, Venezuelan people abroad has been critical in making demonstrations about change in Venezuela. Right now, these people, as Venezuela, inside Venezuela, is frustrated. This is the truth. And I hope that the process of the primaries make possible that we organize again a huge amount of Venezuelan people making noise and pressure and demonstration in different parts of the world in order to help for the change. When we did in 2017 a process of voting that was an informal process but organized by the opposition, we obtained votes from Venezuelan people in almost 300 cities worldwide, which is amazing. And there is a huge strength that we must be able to organize and to be part of this process in the near future.
Thank you, Julio. And Paola, I'll let you have the final word here on that question.
Well, I think, well, thank you to Professor Monaldi for the question. Actually, he is one of the most important thinkers of our country, and we miss him very much here. And I think to this problem that is a really hard topic, we need to have a realistic and a human approach. The truth is that we are a broken country. We are suffering and we need to heal. The truth is that we miss them all the 7 million Venezuelans that have leave the country, not because they want to, because they had to. We miss them and we need them in this political struggle. And it's very important to avoid this idea that it's been really tough for the Cubans, that the people who is outside the country and the people who is inside the country. Because the truth is that we are united by this suffering, and we are united in the hope that we're going to be out of it together. So I think that there are initiatives that are really important to join and to build bridges between the people, the all Venezuelan people who are inside and outside the country, and to have like a vaccine to avoid this terrible appreciation that we are two countries, one inside and one outside. The truth is that we are all together in this, and that we are going to be out of this together.
I couldn't think of a better way to close. Thank you so much, Paola. Thank you so much, Julio. Thank you, everybody here with us in DC and everybody tuning in from around the hemisphere and presumably around the world. This is one of many events that Global Americans is putting on Venezuela. So if you're interested in our program, please find us at theglobalameriCans.org. Thank you again, and we hope to see you all soon.
Bye.